I'm excited to tell this story, and I'm especially excited to tell this story this month and this year. But before you find out why, I'll start with three short stories. And perhaps by the end of it, you will know why this month and this year matter so deeply to me. So let's begin with the first one. Close your eyes for a moment. Think about the word disability. When you hear that word, what do you imagine? You can open your eyes. Maybe just let's look at the screen now. Does it look like this, or this, or this? Do I fit into that picture? Perhaps not. And to be fair, 10 years ago, I too didn't think I belonged in that picture. And that's exactly where my first story begins. Like most people, I grew up thinking disability meant using a wheelchair. Disability meant someone with a visual impairment. Disability meant someone needing support to navigating their surroundings. And disability meant two of my favorite movies, Black and Scent of a Woman. But that's not all what disability meant. I also grew up in a world where disability meant many things, but least of it was inspirational or independent. It meant someone who was intellectually challenged. It meant someone who was the recipient of God's karmic retribution. They were supposed to be the last group to be seen capable, and they were only seen as a group of people to be worthy of our pity. And let's be honest, our collective response to people with disability says more about us than the people we claim to see. As a society, we tend to center ourselves, our guilt, our discomfort, our need to feel generous. So, our response to people with disabilities is guilt, sympathy, charity, but rarely, if ever, empathy. In a world where a person with disability is seen as helpless at best, or someone living a divine retribution at worst, when they are denied agency and offered only pity, why would I ever want to be called a person with disability? But life had a different plan, which brings me to my second story. A decade ago, it was August 2015. I was 15, your age, sitting in a school classroom, sure of how the next 15 years of my life are going to look like. I was going to be a neuropsychiatrist, a field so niche most people had never heard of it, but to me it was the most obvious choice. I grew up loving biology since I was a child, and I was particularly fascinated by the brain. It's this marvelous organ that works 24/7 nonstop. Nothing happens without its consent. It's the command center of your entire universe. But also, in 2013, when I lost my mother, I found myself in a grief that I could not name or imagine or put words to. But psychology gave me the language to make sense of what I was feeling. And neuropsychiatry seemed like the perfect path. It would let me study the brain, understand human emotions, and most importantly, help people find meaning and clarity. So you can imagine the poetic irony when the organ that I admired the most decided to revolt. It was August 2015. I woke up and I found I couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't hold a pen, couldn't eat. I was rushed to the emergency room, my first ever ER visit. I was terrified, but also strangely curious. It still felt like a place where I would one day work, a room that in my mind belonged to doctors, like my future self. A week later, I walked out, better and hopeful. I thought it was over. That this strange episode was a curious aberration, a first hand learning experience in neuroscience. But 5 months later, I was back. Only this time, I was completely blind. This time, I wasn't curious. I wasn't amused. I was terrified. When I came home a week later, I could see little, but what awaited me was a diagnosis: multiple sclerosis. 4 relapses later, that changed to neuromyelitis optica spectrum of disorders. Eventually, I was put on chemotherapy. And then 2 years ago, I was re diagnosed with MOGAD, myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein antibody associated disease. It sounds almost made up, doesn't it? But behind the long names was a simple reality. I have an autoimmune disease of the central nervous system. It causes demyelination, which means that the protective layer around the neuron loses its function. And when that happens, the affected body part cannot function properly. In the last 10 years, I have visited countless hospitals and doctors, and every time the doctors and nurses would look at me walking upright, without a cane, without a wheelchair, and ask, "Where is the patient?" And I would smile to myself, secretly pleased that I had fooled them. Because the truth is, I didn't want to be seen as a person with disability, especially as a woman with disability in a society that so quickly strips you of agency, ambition, and autonomy the minute you carry that label. But here's the harder truth: even when I could walk and talk and looked fine, my illness did not vanish. I was still in pain, still exhausted, still navigating life with limitations I did not always know how to name. And yet, I did not think of myself as disabled until a relapse would put me in a wheelchair and force me and others to confront that truth. Which brings me to my third story, and hopefully, this will bind everything together. It was December 2015. I was 15 years old and furious. I had just come home from yet another hospital stay with more questions than answers. The doctors were doing their best, I knew that, but their best was just not good enough. I wasn't tired of the guessing, the needles, the polite shrugs. That night, I remember telling my father, one day I'm going to write a book about all of this because people don't get it, but one day they will. A book might still be a decade away, but telling the story this month, this year, feels like a good start to the next 10. It's been 10 years since my first relapse, a decade of living with a condition that's often invisible until it isn't. But even in all those years, one memory stands out. It's small, almost forgettable, except it happened too many times to ignore it. At college, I'd often try to take the lift to go to my classroom. It had a sign for use by persons with disability or staff only. And every time I'd brace myself for the questions, a glance, then a pause. Then, "Excuse me, why are you using the lift?" Each time I had to decide: should I explain my condition, risk disbelief, or just say, "I have a condition," and move on? Over time, explaining myself felt more exhausting than taking the staircase. So I stopped trying to take the lift. I trained my body to comply with what the world expected of it, even if it meant pushing it past its limits. That's the quiet cost of living with an invisible disability. You're constantly translating your body for medical charts and society's gaze. You're negotiating whether the pain is bad enough to warrant help and whether help is worth the scrutiny. That experience taught me something deeper. The real barrier wasn't the stairwell, it was the silence that met people like me, the disbelief, the discomfort, the desire to move on quickly. Even people's best attempt at understanding sometimes fell short. Because empathy isn't easy, it's not a soft skill, it's a hard one. We may not all live with a disability, but we all have the power to make the world more livable to someone else. Not through grand gesture, but through small, consistent acts that say, "I see you, you matter." It means, and the instinct that says, you don't owe me an explanation. It's carrying someone's bag up the stairs without fanfare. It's believing someone's pain exists even when you can't see it. If there's one thing I have learned, it's this: empathy is not about fixing people's pain. It's about believing it exists even when you can't see it. And maybe, just maybe, you have practiced it already. You sat here patiently, you heard me out, you listened closely. That's empathy in action. Maybe you were good listeners today because you imagined the kind of audience you would want if you were up here telling your story. And that's right where empathy begins.